time for a little embryology. We're going to talk about our three primary germ layers, and these germ layers, here's a cute little embryo here, and we've taken a little cross section through it, and these germ layers came from the original zygote. A zygote is the first cell after fertilization. Sperm and egg met and formed a little zygote, and then that zygote underwent many mitotic divisions to form these little germ layers, and these germ layers, these many cells here, will differentiate to form our four tissue types. What are the four tissue types? We have four tissue types. We have epithelial tissue, nervous tissue, muscle tissue, and connective tissue, and these tissue types will come about in about the eighth week of development. But before we get these tissues, we have these three germ layers, and our outermost germ layer is called the ectoderm. And then we have the middle germ layer called the mesoderm, and the innermost germ layer called the endoderm. So ecto is outer, meso is middle, and endo is inner. And from the ectoderm, we're going to have two of our tissues forming from the ectoderm. We have epithelial tissue with this little blue line. Epithelial tissue is derived from the ectoderm, and nervous tissue is derived from the ectoderm. From the mesoderm, we're going to have three of our tissue types coming from this middle layer: muscle tissue, connective tissue, and epithelial tissue. And then from the endoderm, from the innermost layer, we just have epithelial tissue coming from this. So just one little type of tissue developing from endoderm. Notice that epithelial tissue is derived from all three germ layers. So epithelial tissue comes from all three layers. So we're going to get a little more specific on the next slide of what's happening with these epithelial tissues. Most of our tissues come from the mesoderm. Muscle, connective, and epithelial come from the mesoderm. But in an earlier lecture, we learned about connective tissue coming from another type of embryonic tissue called mesenchyme. Well, mesenchyme comes from mesoderm, so don't get confused there. Mesoderm differentiates into mesenchyme. Mesenchyme differentiates into our connective tissue. So if you wanted to think of those two things as being the same, that's fine with me. Now, if we want to get a little more specific, ectoderm, it becomes nervous tissue and the epidermis. So back here, when we said the epithelial tissue comes from all three of these layers, now we're going to get a little more specific about what's happening with our epithelial tissue here. The outer part of our skin comes from this nervous tissue. So it's our epidermis that comes from the ectoderm. And then what other epithelial tissue comes from mesoderm? Is going to be called the mesothelium and endothelium. Endothelium is a type of epithelial tissue that lines the inside of the heart and the inside of blood vessels. Mesothelium is a term that we use for simple squamous cells that we find in our serous membranes. So in the membrane lecture, that was a different lecture, we talked about serous membranes. Serous membranes are made of a connective tissue and an epithelial tissue. The epithelial tissue that makes up serous membranes is a simple squamous epithelium. And the special term for that simple squamous epithelium, we call it a mesothelium. And so, and you may have heard of a cancer called mesothelioma. I can't even say it right now. My lips are too dry, but mesothelioma. So mesothelium is simple squamous epithelium. So that comes from mesoderm. You'll hear these terms in future chapters. And on endoderm, the endoderm is the part of the epithelium that makes up the mucous membranes. So all throughout the respiratory tract, the digestive tract, and the urogenital tract, all of those are lined with different types of epithelial tissues, but those are all derived from the endoderm. So all of our tissues, though, the actual epithelial tissues, nervous tissues, muscle tissues, and nervous tissues, they're all derived by 8 weeks of gestation. So those primary germ layers are gone by then. And that's all we have to say about our primary germ layers. That's about all of the embryology that we do in anatomy and physiology. So you're lucky there. You do a lot more. So actually, now this is a little odd. we're switching totally from those germ layers, and we're going to go back to our connective tissues, because this chart was in your textbook, and I didn't do this with the connective tissues. I did a different chart with the connective tissues, a totally different chart. This is the chart that is in your textbook, and I just want to go over it right now. So it's totally random. I'm going to do it now anyway. These are the different types of connective tissues. We have connective tissue proper, and we have cartilage, and then on the next pages we're going to have bone tissue and blood. So this is, just think of this as a lucky review for you for your connective tissues. Remember that with connective tissue proper, we have two types. We have loose connective tissue and dense connective tissue, and these are the difference between these, how the fibers are arranged. And we have those three different types of loose connective tissue: irregular, adipose, and reticular. The three different types of dense: regular, irregular, and elastic. And our main cell types for each: fibroblasts are going to be the main cell types for these guys. Main cell types for all of these guys, because they make all the fibers. But the main cell type actually in adipose tissue will be adipocytes. There'll be more defense cells in reticular tissue, so that'd be good to put there. All right, and on all of these, for the connective tissue proper, you want to know what the ground substance is like, and you want to know that you have collagen fibers, reticulin fibers, and elastic fibers, and what is the abundance of each. In a regular connective tissue, you have equal abundance of each of these three fiber types, and they're just scattered loosely about. In adipose tissue, you don't really see any of these fiber types. You just see a bunch of adipose tissue. In reticular tissue, you see mainly just reticular fibers. That's all you see. In the dense connective tissues, in regular and irregular connective tissues, you see all just collagen fibers. And in the elastic dense connective tissues, you just see the elastic fibers. All right. If we go down to the cartilages, and hyaline, elastic, and fiber cartilage, the strongest one of these cartilages would be fiber cartilage. The most elastic one and most resilient would be the elastic, and hyaline cartilage is the most abundant cartilage that you'll find in the body. All of them cushion and support, and they have lots and lots of water in their matrix because of the glycosaminoglycans, particularly hyaluronic acid, that they trap in their matrix. Remember that the chondroblasts make the matrix, and they turn into chondrocytes when they're trapped in the lacunae. Here we have bone tissue. Bone tissue is like cartilage in the fact that the little osteoblasts make the matrix, and then they get trapped in the lacunae and become osteocytes. But unlike cartilage, which is avascular and it is not innervated, bone tissue has a great vascular supply, and it's very innervated, and so it repairs itself very well. It functions in support and protection, and blood is made in your bone, not in this type of bone, but in a different. All the solid portion you see in here is made of collagen fibers, and bone also stores minerals, because the minerals are stored in this portion around the collagen fibers, like calcium phosphates. We would call those inorganic salts. When we get down here to blood, in case you missed it in a previous lecture, blood is unlike all the other connective tissues in that its matrix in the background is completely liquid. The matrix is called plasma, and it's not viscous in the least bit. We don't want it to be viscous. You would have a stroke if it were viscous. The fibers, you don't have any fibers that are solid. You have soluble fibers. Soluble fibers, they're in the background. They would only become insoluble if you were forming a blood clot, and then they come out of solution. And that's, I guess, about it that I want to say about blood, except for they carry oxygen here, fight off disease here, and the platelets that you don't see are for clotting, and those platelets would start the little trigger to make the fibers come out of solution. The fibrin molecules come out of solution. And that's it.